Good afternoon. It's Monday. It's Bank Holiday Monday here after yesterday, which was Easter Sunday. All these stupid names they give these days, all part of a culture that's been formed, which has nothing to do with God, nothing to do with Jesus, nothing to do with quotation marks, religion. It's just all part of a big cult so that everybody can take part in the pagan game. So today I'm going to spend a little time introducing what I mentioned yesterday, that I wanted to talk about cancer, but I wanted to talk about cancer from a philosophical, esoteric perspective. So I'm just going to introduce a little bit about what I will be engaging in with you over the next couple of days, but I'll try not to make the whole video each day about this subject, because I also want to take you into the garden and let you know what's going on. Things are evolving very quickly. So yesterday I mentioned to you a book that I read about 3 or 4 years ago, and that was recommended to me by a young lady in a group that I ran, who herself, from what I remember, hadn't read the whole book, but she is Austrian, and it's quite well known in Austria because one of the authors is or was, one of them has died, was Austrian. So this book is called, I'm just going to show it to you here if you can see it, The Healing Power of Illness. And it's written by, and it's important to know who it's written by so you understand their mind. I've mentioned this many times before in videos. And it's written by 2 men. One of them is dead. They were born in the late 40s and early 50s. One in the late 40s, one in the early 50s. One, unfortunately, has passed away now. He passed away in 2010. So these individuals grew up. One was born in Germany, from memory. One was born in Austria. And on a side note, why is it so many great minds come from Germany and Austria? I found this repeating itself again and again and again, and I still don't really know why. Anyway, coming back to what I was saying, Ruediger Dahlke is a doctor and a psychotherapist since 1979. That's a long time ago. And Thorwald Dethlefsen, who's now deceased, was a German psychologist, but also an esotericist and the author of several books, who died in 2010. Now, we've all heard of the word esoteric, and as soon as we hear that word, some people won't know what on earth that means, but others, as soon as they hear the word esoteric, they think automatically, oh, that woo-woo nonsense. But it's far from it. What I did is I went and picked up a dictionary that I've got, which is a 1911 written dictionary, and it's actually the first edition of the Oxford Dictionary. I'll talk more about dictionaries later, and I wanted to read the meaning of esoteric in that, and it's very much linked to scripture in some ways. So esoteric is of philosophical doctrines meant only for the initiated, and then in brackets it's got of disciples, private and confidential. Now, if you look at Google or one of the mainstream definitions of esotericism, they'll say something similar, and they'll talk about the Kabbalah and the Cabal and mystics. And the idea behind the modern definition is for you to look at it and then be motivated by propaganda over the years against that word. So anybody who's got an esoteric mind has got to be slightly doolally. That is not true. Now, if you remember on a previous video, And in that video, I had read a piece from a book where I explained, and it was the same book, which is The Prayers of the Cosmos, and written by Klotz, where he had explained the language of Aramaic and how in those days, when you understood Aramaic and read it, you would understand it from 3 or 4 different bandwidths. So it would be the literal, the metaphoric, and the universal, which was the mystic. So all of these things, which is actually esoteric, I would take that as esoteric. Okay, so now I've explained that to you. Going back to what I just said, sorry, my hair's getting in the way. That's why I wear a hat, because I don't like my hair getting in the way. That Thorwald Dethlefsen was a German psychologist and an esotericist. Now, this is the book, The Healing Power of Illness. You can look it up. This is probably a newer edition. I did actually have a very old edition that I gave away to a friend as a gift, but this is the same. I'm not going to read from this book yet. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to talk to you about cancer from Rudolf Steiner's perspective. Now, if you remember, in a previous video, I talked about Steiner being an anthroposophist, and he studied spiritual science. In fact, let me just very quickly go back to that page, and I read this out to you as well, if you remember, but just so that you know who Steiner is. Steiner is many things, very close to God, Christian, but I don't want you to get fixated on that. It's just, he was just a man of God, right? His gift to the world was anthroposophy, or spiritual science, and just to explain what that is the path of inner development that aims to guide the spiritual in the human being to the spiritual in the universe. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I've just lost that page now. Oh yeah, here it is. I was looking through this book earlier today to try and find the part that explained about the role of tomatoes and potatoes in the human body. And I'm doing that because, again, in a recent video, I showed you that I just planted my potatoes, and I mentioned to you that potatoes are a very selfish vegetable along with tomatoes. And I had explained in that video that I'm going to shoot another video explaining why. So let me explain why, because at least you'll understand what I'm going to say in the next 3 days from this perspective, okay? And I have to read this out to you. So this is what Rudolf Steiner, in one of his lectures, this book called Agriculture, I shared this with you before, and it's a series of lectures. Some of you hopefully may have bought it, but anyway, I want to read this out to you because it's very significant, and I'll just read some of it, not all of it, otherwise I'll be here all day. So he says in one of his lectures, tomatoes have a very significant effect on everything that tends to separate itself from the organism and develop an independent organization within the body. 2 things follow from this. On the one hand, it confirms a statement of an American researcher, namely that under certain circumstances, adding tomatoes to the diet can have a beneficial effect on an unhealthy human liver. Now, why is this? This is because the liver is the organ that works most independently in the human body. When the liver is diseased, especially in animals, it could also be treated in general with tomatoes. Now, this is important. See, what Rudolf Steiner says is that by understanding this, we gain insight into the relationship between plant and animals. Now, on the other hand, he wants to say this in brackets, in parentheses, that people diagnosed as having cancer should immediately be forbidden to eat tomatoes. Why? This is because cancer, from its very inception, makes a certain part of the human or animal body independent of the rest of the organism. Now, can you see at least the seedling understanding of why I had said a few days back that tomatoes and potatoes are a very selfish fruit and vegetable? Cancer is a very selfish disease. People that develop cancer are cancerous themselves. You've got to be careful before you assume a meaning of what I've just said. You'll realise over the next 3 or 4 days what I mean by that. Okay, so now I'm just going to move on. I can't read everything. Okay, so what he says, and this is important because I mentioned this also in the previous video, that why then do tomatoes in particular have a strong effect on everything that tends to be independent, on everything that specialises and separates itself off from the rest of the organism? Now, this tendency is related to what tomatoes prefer and require for their own growth. And I mentioned in that video that you can give tomatoes just a big pot of manure that's freshly been pooped out of a chicken bottom, and they will feel very home, because I'll tell you why. Let me actually, he talks about it properly. That tomatoes feel most at home when they are given manure or compost that is as close as possible to the form in which it comes from the animal or other source. They prefer raw compost that hasn't much chance or had much chance to be transformed through the natural processes. And what he means by that, my arm's aching, what he means by that is that being selfish, what has happened is that with manure, for it to work effectively generally for most plants, it needs to break down, it needs to work with nature, it needs to work with cosmology and the moon and the sun and the other elements of nature in the air for it to become a fertile medium to grow in. What Steiner is saying is that tomatoes and potatoes are so selfish that they don't want to commune with all of those other entities to create something good. They just think about themselves. You follow? So, if you throw all kinds of scraps together onto an untidy heap and give the heap no further treatment or preparation, you'll find that the most beautiful tomatoes will grow there. And if you were to use compost made from tomato plants, that is, if you let the tomatoes grow in their own compost, they would grow even better. Tomatoes have no desire to step outside of themselves, no desire to step outside of the realm of strong vitality. That's where they want to stay. They are the least social beings in the entire plant kingdom. They don't want anything from strangers, and above all, they don't want any fertiliser that has gone through any sort of composting process. They reject it all. That is the reason they can influence what works independently within the human being or animal organism. And then he goes on to say that potatoes are very, very similar. And basically he means they pass through the entire digestive process and enter the brain, and they make the brain completely independent, even of the influences of the other organs of the human body. Oh, I could go on and tell you more about this, but I'm trying to focus on the cancer element. Are you getting the picture of what I'm saying? It's just an introduction. This is just from a food perspective to explain how certain fruits and vegetables are very selfish in their nature, and how cancer in the body is also very selfish in nature, as he's just explained here. that a human being that has developed cancer, you would not want to give that person food which contains potatoes and tomatoes. And actually it's raw tomatoes. You can cook the tomatoes. I've read that somewhere else. Okay. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that, first of all, there are several lessons here. That, number one, an insight into the type of disease that cancer is. It's a very selfish disease. It wasn't a disease that was prevalent even 100 years ago, that much. And look now, every other person has cancer. It's a complete reflection of society itself, which you'll learn more about when I read extracts of the other book, The Healing Power of Illness. And you've also learning here that we are not designed as human beings to live from the selfish place of what you could call ego. That is something we have to, it's when we become so ego, and everybody, we've got an ego, we weren't born with an ego, we develop it very quickly. But the whole lesson here is to let go of that ego and realize that we're part of something big. And I don't want to sound like you've heard this all before, because you have. But the truth of the matter is that we are not individuals alone, and me, you are separate. We are all one. And the understanding that we can only thrive in community. Oh my God. I mean, aren't you hearing this everywhere right now? The truth that we can only survive in community is actually the key to a prosperous, healthy future where human beings start to recognize who they are and why they're here. Okay, it was quite a long video, 16 minutes. So I hope that's given you some insight. And tomorrow I'll give you a little bit more, little bit more exploration into the real esoteric reasons for cancer. Have a lovely day.